So I made some pretty bold claims in the last video about the idea that I was going to be launching a Kickstarter this week. Spoiler alert, that didn't happen. I did some work. I did a lot of work. Hopefully the time lapse is actually some of that work. Depends how long that time lapse is versus how long this takes me to waffle on about what's gone on this week. But I think it's worth talking about one of the topics that I mentioned I would talk about, which was flexibility and being flexible with the non-negotiables that you set yourself and the priorities that you set inside of those, the previous things that I talked about. Because being flexible inside of those things allows you to adapt and accept what's happening during the process. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the channel. My name's Neil and I like to make stuff. Having had a 30-year career making comics and doing concept art for other people, I'm currently focusing on doing things for myself, and so I'm making comics and tabletop gaming content. On the channel, I talk about my process as I do try and do that for myself, how I build the worlds, how I flesh them out, how I do all of the things associated with trying to create my own content and release it, not just to document my own process of doing it, but in the hopes that I can encourage other people to do something similar. And for those that are already doing something similar, maybe something I've got to say will help them. So with that said, back to I'm going to get a Kickstarter released by the end of this week versus where I'm at. The truth about getting a Kickstarter released, making a bold claim like that, is when you make a bold claim along those lines, and there's nothing wrong with making bold claims along those lines, even if you don't meet the claim, as long as you understand why you didn't meet the claim and adjust the plan along the way so that you are able to reevaluate and keep moving forward. When I made the claim last week, I hadn't looked into what it actually took to release a Kickstarter. And the truth is that to release a Kickstarter with nothing else involved, Kickstarter obviously has an approval process, and that obviously takes time. Now, I haven't even got to the stage where what I was planning to release, I am able to put up for approval, because before I put it up for approval, while I don't want the entire project finished before I launch the Kickstarter, because I do want the Kickstarter in part to be a motivator for getting something finished and released. Otherwise, much like I always have done, you just wallow in going round and round in circles, telling yourself this isn't good enough for release and all of those things. So part of the want to release this Kickstarter is because when there's money on the line and somebody's paying me and people are expecting me to deliver, I do deliver. I will be able to get this project finished to a deadline and get it out the door in the way that I have for my entire career getting comics finished. So I know I will treat it in the same way. As a brief update of where the Kickstarter's at, it's written for the most part. It needs a bit of editing and whatnot, but I absolutely know the entire story for this small 10-page zine. I'll get to the 10-page part in a minute. Actually, it'll probably be 12 pages, 8 or 12 pages, but there's a reason I mentioned 10 pages, which I'm going to touch on briefly in a second. So for this, the writing is mostly done, and already was last week, if I'm honest. What I wanted to get done was a cover and more examples of what to expect design and art-wise. And it's the cover that's held me up, because as my first one, I want to set a tone for the kinds of zines and whatnot I'm going to be making going forward. As an idea of that, the idea behind the way I'm going to do zines is a bigger connected story, which I mentioned last week that I was planning on doing for the game jam for Shadow Dark, which I knew had spiraled out of control and I couldn't get finished in time. But then for this Kickstarter, the idea is to take each small part, each of the 3 acts, if you like, in the story, finish those as small individual zines and then collect them as a zine. Going forward from there, I would start a Patreon where each month I release one of these small zines, and then every 3 months I would collect them as a collected zine onto Kickstarter. Now that idea in itself needs more planning than me just saying that, because what you want to do is make sure that the people who are supporting you on Patreon are getting value for money that is separate from whatever it is that you're putting on Kickstarter, because otherwise you could just wait for the Kickstarter. And so I need to come up with something that adds value to the individual issues that maybe isn't a part of the Kickstarter, more for the sake of the people supporting you on Patreon. than the people buying on Kickstarter. The reason for that is because I see Patreon as a platform where people are directly supporting the creator, and Kickstarter as a platform where people are buying a product. And to me, that's a big difference. That's a big change between those two platforms. To me, the people on Patreon, no matter how well your Kickstarter does, to me, the people on Patreon are the people who are turning up month after month after month to support what it is that you're trying to do and what you're trying to achieve. Whereas the people on Kickstarter, as much as they might like what you do as well, I'm sure they do, there's also a huge percentage of people who are just there for the product. And so that's why I would want to make sure that if I'm making a monthly Patreon that I then collect into a Kickstarter, that the people supporting it on Patreon are getting value for the money beyond what the Kickstarter is offering. So yes, I think that as a learning lesson, making the statement isn't a problem. The flexibility, this is where the flexibility comes in, adjusting the terms of your statement and owning that. I could have made excuses today for why it didn't get done. The simple truth is the cover's just taking me longer than I thought it would. And that's taking me longer than I thought it would because of all of the reasons that I'm slow and I struggle with the work anyway, which is I really want the cover to be right, especially for this first one and for anyone afterwards. But as the first thing that I'm going to try and actually release into the world of my own content, it feels a bit different. It's why I've drawn the first page of Jules more than 50 times. That's true. I've drawn 2.5 issues worth of comic on one page. I mean, literally redrawing the same page 50 times in a way that no one cares. I know no one cares. No one except for me, right? I know that if I showed the page, maybe I'll post it up here. I know that if I showed the page, people would look at it and think, okay, that's just a page. And it's not even a very interesting page, to be honest. But I looked at it during the week and I still want to redraw it again because it isn't right by my eye. And I, that's seeing it very differently, I know to the way everybody else would see it. If it was in a comic and I'd released Jules, if I'd done 50 pages instead of drawing page one once, people would have read that page for less than a minute, 10 seconds, 15 seconds. Your eye just flows off the page because there's no dialogue, there's nothing like that. It's just 4 panels. And I know that people would look at it for less than a minute, for less than 30 seconds even, and not care. They'd just get to the next page and that would be that. But this is part of the peril of what I live with as an artist and what I know many others live with as an artist as well. I think it's why many people don't ever finish their own projects versus have extremely successful careers. Anyway, that's a complete side note. That's what has held me up on the cover. But the cover is getting done and finished. There may be a time lapse here of the cover running to the state that it's in right now. Within the next few days, the cover will be done. And now the adjusted plan is that I just have the Kickstarter done and launched by the end of this month. So I launched the Kickstarter during Zine Quest still. Just launch it. I need to finish this cover. I'm going to do a few more bits of art. I'm going to lay out a couple of pages and then I'm going to launch it. And then over the course of March, I will finish it. This comes back to the 10-page thing that I just mentioned. So about 2 days after having posted a video saying, yeah, I'm just going to launch a Kickstarter by the end of the week, a video come up by Kesh. I can't think of the channel's full name off the top of my head, but some of you may or may not know it. Hundreds of thousands of subscribers, extremely good videos, very quick artist, part of a very current generation of artists that work in a very different way to the way that I work, that's for sure. And in his video, he talks about having a 30-day project and that anybody trying to get their own thing off the ground should set a 30-day project, get it done and get the small win. Something I 100% agree with. Right? I completely agree with the sentiment. But in the video, he mentions that you should every day for the 30 days just spend half an hour working on this project, and his suggestion is to get a 10-page comic finished by the end of that 30 days. So I very respectfully, something I try very hard to do when I'm talking to people online, I went on and explained that was extremely unrealistic for some people. Now, Kesh on his channel, as you would see if you go and have a look, has, and as he points out, there's been a back and forth between us, super respectful one. Really nice guy, really good conversation, where we've gone back and forth about this idea of finishing projects and doing all of those things. And as I said to him, I said, it's not to say that it's not possible at all. He's done it. When I was working on the Flash, and this is something I mentioned to him in the comments on his video, Carmine, who was also working on the Flash was taking me to finish an issue 6 weeks of hard work. Carmine finished an issue in 48 hours and filmed it, did a whole issue of the Flash in 48 hours, something that was taking me 6 weeks to do. Different people work at different speeds. My point in the comments on his video was to say that can't judge yourself as a creator by one other person, right? You can't look at somebody like Kesh who is able to do, as he pointed out in one of his replies, he says like he created a 9-page comic and an animation in a week, like an animation based on that comic in a week, and like I just said, Carmine finished an entire issue of the Flash in 48 hours, something that took me 6 weeks to do. The point is, there are opposite ends of the scale, and as a creator you have to know where you sit in that scale when you're judging whether you are succeeding or failing or not at being a creator. My point of making the first comment was so that anybody reading the comments who might read my comment would see that as somebody who's been doing this for 30 years, I couldn't do the challenge he was setting, but I could do the challenge he was setting, right? I could make a 10-page comic in 30 days or a 10-page RPG zine in 30 days because I just know that I have to dedicate more time to it. It's not that I can't do it in 30 days. It's that I can't do it in a 30 minutes a day timescale. I couldn't finish 10 pages in 15 hours, no matter how hard I tried. There's just no way I could do that. I'm just not that creator. And so that was my point. And this is the point about being flexible. In a subsequent comment, and it's something I'm going to reply to him on today, is he asks for 5 tips when setting a 30-day project like that. And it raises a good point, because one of the tips that I would make is keep a track of what you're doing and be flexible and adjust as you go along. Me not hitting my Kickstarter deadline by the end of this week isn't me saying, right, well, I'm not doing it. It's me saying, okay, what's the adjustment here? What is it I'm going to have to adjust? I either have to extend the deadline or I have to work more hours. I could work more hours, but not many. I do a full day's work, whether it be on my own work or whether it be on War Cradles. I do a full day's work already when I work. That's just how I work. So my adjustment could be in time. I could throw a few more hours at it, but even if I did that, it wouldn't be enough to get it done in that time scale. So therefore I have to extend the time scale, not end the project. So taking Kesh's videos advice to heart, I'm going to get a 8 to 12 page RPG zine finished in 30 days. That I can do. The amount of time I am very fortunate enough to be able to throw at it. For other people, when they evaluated it, that might not be possible for them based on timings, based on the way they work, based on what their life is like, all of those things. Like I've said many times, I'm very fortunate. I do this for a career already, and I'm carving out time to dedicate to trying to make creating my own content a part of my career. That puts me in a fortunate position for sure. And so each person has to look at their own situation and in amongst their own situation, be flexible on what it is they can achieve in any given timescale or in any given scope. You can either look at the time scale and think, what can I get done in that time? Or you can look at the scope and think, how long is it going to take me to get that done? You have to be able to look at either the scope of the project or what it is you're able to achieve in the time that you have. So for me, I've looked at both, right? I've looked at it that it was very unrealistic. I should have known better. It was but I think this covers a very different point. But me making that announcement has instead meant, instead of in the past when I haven't made announcements like that and I'm able to just keep going and drawing the first page of Jaws 50 times over, I've made the statement now. And for those few people that have seen the videos, instead of me just extending a deadline indefinitely, now I'm on to a situation where it's like, okay, what is the reality here? The reality is I want this scene finished by the end of March, which gives me more than 30 days, but it does give me a very good gauge of what I can get done in what amount of time. And within the next 2 weeks, I want the Kickstarter up and running for it. And we'll see where that goes. And I'll keep it updated here. Like I say, I don't really know what the title of this video is going to be, but in all reality, it was about being flexible, which tied into the conversation that I was having with Kesh, more about you've got to be flexible with what you was doing. The funny thing about that Kesh video was I saw the video, was like, that's just not realistic for that won't be realistic for a lot of people, especially people who are in the earliest stages of their journey. and trying to figure out what it is that they can and cannot do. And it could be very off-putting if somebody they respect and admire, like Kesh, says spend 30 minutes a day on this and get a 10-page comic finished by the end of 30 days, and then they don't achieve it. That can be extremely disheartening. And that is absolutely no disrespect to what he was saying in that video, because during the conversation that we had, as he said, he's just really trying to encourage people to get out there and make some stuff and to accept small wins and don't really sweat the losses. And from my angle, from the opposite side of the angle, as a completely opposite end of the scale artist to him, somebody whose stuff does take a long time, my work does take me a long time. My thing was, it can be very disheartening. I used my story about Akira to illustrate my point, which was, when I first saw Akira, I judged my entire worth by could I get close to that in a similar timescale, and did so for the first 20 years of my career. 20 years? 15 years of my career. My first 15. When I found Akira, it set a standard for what my work should be like, and it completely changed my approach to doing art. It was when I first really started to buy a lot of manga at that point, and things like Appleseed and Akira started to really inform the style and detail and approach that I wanted. I didn't find out till I was 40 that they use assistants and stuff like that, and some people use more assistants than others. Now, how many assistants were used on Akira is hard to find a direct thing. I've heard 6, but then I read the other day only 2. But the point being is, when you set your standards by this other thing that you see or hear or assume, I made assumptions, it can be really, really disheartening and really, really overwhelming. Work was really, really overwhelming for me because I was desperately setting myself by this standard that was completely not even real. Like I said, finding out that he had assistants was in itself was very disheartening in a way, because I was like, what have I been doing all this time? Why have I been working to this unrealistic standard? So this is where I'm at. I didn't release the Kickstarter by the end of this week, and it was unrealistic of me to set that. I should have at least done the research into what it takes to set a Kickstarter, and I should have stopped to consider what it was that I was going to try and get finished for the Kickstarter. Because when I made the announcement, it was like, I want a Kickstarter launched by the end of this week. That was all I thought about. I'd not thought about how long it was going to take me to draw a cover, given what I know about myself and the way I create. I hadn't really thought about what it was that I wanted content-wise ready for the Kickstarter so that I could put it up, how long it would take me after the fact, what it takes to run a Kickstarter. I hadn't thought about any of those things. Now I have. Now, when I got to a few days ago, once I got into, because the point I was making was I made these comments to Kesh on his video. And then like later on that day, I just thought to myself, you've made the exact same mistake yourself in your own videos on YouTube, where you just set this unrealistic goal without any consideration for what the goal takes to achieve. So yes, the Kickstarter will still be coming. There's going to be updates on Jules soon on what I'm doing about the comic, as well as what's going on with these zines, because these zines are off track for what I'm actually trying to achieve. This is something I will talk about in detail, but these zines are off track from the bigger picture of what I'm trying to achieve. But I really enjoy making them, even though they're off track. They've got nothing to do with Jules. They've got nothing to do with Welcome to Caliber Bay, and everything I was trying to do was really based on that. And if not, then I had this list of ideas to work on. And this idea for this zine is based on this idea called the Vault of Iron. And it's far down my list of what I want to do. But right at this point in time, outside of making the comic for Jaws and Welcome to Caliber Bay, it's actually the easiest idea, because I don't have to do any game development work. I'm just making content for other games that exist for people to use. And I would like to do that anyway. And I would enjoy. The difference is with the other things that are higher on the list is they all require me to make a game system as well. And right now, that's another area where I've completely underestimated what it really takes to do that. So I am kind of cutting my teeth on the tabletop gaming content by doing some of these zines and fleshing out this World of Iron idea. And I think while I do that, in the background, I will work on the Welcome to Caliber Bay game system, the Fears system, and work on the Jaws comic. I did more work on the Jaws comic for the first time in a long time, if I'm honest. But I'll update on all those things soon. Okay, this has been 25 minutes. There's no way the time lapse of the work that I've done already for the zine is going to fill this amount of time. So, right, I'm going to leave this one here. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for watching. I've been Neil, and I still don't know how to end these. Be realistic. And again, set some goals. I'll link Kesh's video below. Go and watch it. I recommend you try his challenge. He's create something small in 30 days. Just try it. Doesn't matter what it is. Just try and make something in the 30 days. So, all right, just watch him. Bye. Bye. Bye.